Today we're going to work on a gill dreadnought. The first thing I want to do is show you how to put a string on, because this is an area that is pretty important, and I find that people don't all know how to put a string on. So let's put one on. Let's replace this G string here. Take the string winder and show you how that works. Just going to bring my hand back in here and just real carefully pull that out. It came loose right away. Now I can just pop that pin right out of there. Just get rid of this string. Take a new string here. And for this type of guitar, take the slotted side of the pin and put that towards the string. Now I'm pulling the string up. The pin isn't all the way in yet, but I've pulled the string up. It's seating now underneath on the top of the guitar there, just underneath the bridge. So now I can push the pin all the way in, now that I know it's seated up and it's not going to slip on me. Now we'll move it up here and we'll slip it in. I like to pull here, leave about 6, maybe 4 to 6 inches is usually pretty good right here. And that'll give you enough string. You do want a little string wound around your pole here on the tuner, because it'll keep, especially on acoustic guitar, we're going to be doing a lot of open tunings, and you'll be tuning back and forth. And if you don't have a little bit of string up there, you tune back and forth 2 or 3 times and that string breaks. So we like a little bit of winding there. And always wind it. You see here I'm holding the string. Got force on the string. I'm holding it pretty tight and winding this at the same time. That way, while you're winding this string on here, it stretches it a little bit as it winds on, and this will help it stay in tune. So we get that up there and we really give it a little bit of force, and I'm going to go ahead and pull on this a little bit. Just like that. That's really stretching that string out. It's amazing how much strings stretch when you first put them on. And there we have it. Now at this point, one of the tricks people have here, I learned this from some of the guys, just wind that thing off and it breaks right off of there. So now what we need to do is get the guitar tuned up to pitch. For this particular setup, acoustic guitar players use a lot of tunings. So this is pretty typical these days. So I'm initially going to tune the guitar up to pitch. So I'll take the tuning fork and just hit it there and go for my A. At this point in the job, you don't need to get it perfectly in tune, but you want to get pretty close because you're trying to create the kind of tension that we're going to be working with. And I'm tuning it while it's still on the neck rest. If I were to pick it up, it would change it a little bit, but that's not that important at this point in time. We just want to get fairly close to what kind of tension we want to create. And I think we're there. I'm going to check it one more time. I'm just going to give it or you can put it right on the body. So we're there. Now that we've got it tuned up to pitch, I'm going to go ahead and pull out my neck rest here, because we're going to work on the truss rod a little bit. Put that up here. Let's take this truss rod cover off. This is the area where the truss rod is located on this particular guitar, and we want to get that off of there. Try to get this little screw out of there without losing it. There we go. You may want to have a little box when you're doing this sort of thing. Put the parts. That's what I generally do at the shop, is I'll have a little box, put my parts in so I don't lose them. Okay, so now we want to check the neck and see if see where it's at right now before we do any adjustments. So we'll go take our 18-inch straight edge here, and I'm going to pick the guitar up and I'm going to move it off the bench a little bit. We don't want to check the truss rod while it's on the neck rest. Believe it or not, there's quite a bit of extra force there, so you won't get a proper read. So we're going to take it, pull it off, just rest the guitar here. Now the neck is setting freely, and that's how we're going to check it. And we're just going to take a look here, and we want to look to see that somewhere between maybe 6 and 10, 6 and 12, you just see a little bit of a gap. You want to just see a crack of light there. You know, with guitars these days, the way that we set them up, you really want that neck fairly straight. I like to leave a crack of light because I like a little bit of room so that you can have a little bit of room for the wood to move, because it will on a daily basis. So the other thing I want to do is I want to check 3 zones. I want you to check the high E, just run this right up against the high E string, check that zone of the neck. Then I want you to run it right up the middle and check that zone. And then the final zone is the low E. Just push it right up against there and check that. So we've done that, we look at it, and we can see we've got just a little bit of a crack of light. Now, we talked about the fact that acoustic guitar players like to use a lot of open tunings. If you're one of those people, now what we're going to do is we're going to open tune it a little bit. I found that there's a lot of tunings, but if you just go to an open D, that's going to really work well to get, in the end, say maybe use 4 or 5 different tunings. The open D is a good average that you'll be okay. The neck will be in the right position when you're in open D or in one of your other open tunings, as well as when you tune it all the way up to pitch. So now let's just go ahead and drop it down. The low E becomes a D. The A stays A. The D stays D. The G string we're going to drop down to an F sharp. Your B string goes down to an A. And then your high E string is also D. Close, not perfect, but close enough for what we're doing right now, because we're going to check that tension. Now let's just see how much it moved between the straight tuning and the drop tuning. And let's see if we still have a little bit of room. And we don't. Now we're getting a little bit of, that's how much it moved. Now we're rocking. And this is what we want to look out for. If you get some back bow going in the neck like that, then what will happen is you won't be able to play those first few notes. So what we're going to have to do now is adjust the truss rod. Adjusting the truss rod is a really important thing to get used to. I will be showing a little more detail on adjusting truss rods in a different segment. But for now, the first thing you want to do when adjusting a truss rod is always loosen it first. Don't just try to tighten it. You have no idea where this is at. The person who was working on the guitar earlier may have already tightened it up as much as it can go. Just the slightest extra turn and you've snapped the truss rod. So I suggest if you're not comfortable with this is something maybe you want to take to a professional luthier, have them look at it for you, make sure it's working properly. If you are comfortable, then let's go ahead, let's loosen it up a little bit, and let's just see what's happening. This one is actually fairly tight. It helps when adjusting on this particular type of guitar. Just go ahead and pick that D string and that G string up. Move them out of the way a little bit. Gives you a little more room for this truss rod wrench to move. On this particular guitar, we're using a 1/4 inch truss rod tool. On the Guilds, that works real nicely. So we've just turned it maybe 1/4 of a turn. And that should probably do it. Let's take a look again. And yep, that's done it. Now we're okay. Touching, we've got just a crack of light there. And we'll check all 3 zones. You'll find that from guitar to guitar, the neck does not, these 3 zones will be slightly different. And people come in and they're all freaked out. A lot of times somebody's told them their neck is twisted. The fact is most necks twist a little bit to one way or another, because it is wood and there are some variances in there that you can't predict. So don't get freaked out about it. It's typical. The other thing that happens is it's wood. Things move around. The frets move around a little bit. And if it's really bad from one side, the 3 zones, one is say underbowed, and you get to the other zone and it's overbowed. This is a case where maybe it's going to be a guitar that you're going to have to take into your favorite luthier shop, and it may need to be refretted, have the fingerboard straightened out, or maybe it just needs the frets dressed. But for now, we're going to do the best we can with whatever you have. So let's just try to get the 3 zones so that none of the zones are overbowed. Right now this one's in pretty good shape, so we're ready to go. Put the string on. This is the point where we're going to take a look at the action height. And to check the action properly, if we were to just check the action right now without putting a capo on, well, some of these strings here on the nut might be higher than others. So what we want to do, this is something I came up with for the shop years ago. We just stick a capo on the first fret. Now we're going to be dead consistent because we always want to match this radius. So now that we've done that, we've got the capo on. Now we're going to go ahead and measure. And I always like to take a measurement of the string height right here at the neck joint. That's the place, when you get back behind there on, say, this acoustic guitar, they usually have it tipped down just ever so slightly because the top of the guitar moves from time to time. So you have to have a little bit of room for that. So that's not a good place to measure. So we want to measure right at that neck joint. And on this particular guitar, we want to set the action at 3/32 by 7/64. That'll give us a nice height to work with. And on this guitar right now, we're a little high. We're at, looks like we're at 1/8 of an inch and a little over 1/8 of an inch here at 5/32. So that's too high. So the next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to loosen up all these strings, and we're going to have to take this saddle out. So let's go ahead and do that. Loosen up your capo. This is where the string winder comes in handy. Let's just carefully pull these pins out. What I like to do here is get the strings out and keep them in groups of 3, because if you just let them hang around, a lot of bad things can happen. Not to mention they'll just get tangled in each other. So what we'll do is we take 3 of them like this, and I just package them right here at the top. Let's get the other 3 off. It's nice these bridge pins are somewhat cooperating. If they get a little too stuck for the bridge winder, you like this one is, take a pliers and be careful. Do this with 2 hands. Just ease it out of there. Once again, let's just wind those together. That'll be out of our way then. And then we take this saddle out. This one is really in there tight, which you'll find that a lot of times they are. So let's just take a pliers and reach over on one side or the other and just ever so slightly pull that, and there it comes. It's come out now. Okay. So now we're going to take this over to a sanding block. Here we have some 80 grit sandpaper on just a block of wood. And when we were measuring there, we noticed that the low side was a little higher than the high string. So we're going to follow this radius, but we're going to change it just a tiny bit. It's going to be a little more taken off the low side than the high side to get down to the action we want. And the other thing is, you may wonder, why am I not just taking the flat side and sanding the bottom off? Most of your acoustic guitars today have pickups in them, and that bottom of the saddle and the inside slot on a acoustic guitar is just dead perfect. And as soon as you start messing around with that on a sanding block or anything, you're going to throw off your pickup, and you'll play it, and all of a sudden it'll be 3 or 4 strings are real loud and 2 strings are real quiet. So that's why we're going to do all of our adjustments from the top. So let's just take it here and just lightly sand it. We can take a look at it and see how we're doing there. We don't want to take too much off. This is the part of the job where you may have to go back and forth 10 times. You may even have to go back and forth 20 times to get it right. But I suggest just go slow, a little bit at a time, till you get the feel for it. And if you go too much, you can't put anything back on here. So let's just go a little bit at a time. Put that back in there. Now we're keeping the saddle flat because a little later on we're going to show, and in one of the other segments a little bit about intonation. And so I want a nice surface to work with, because we're gonna, when we do shape the top of the saddle, we're gonna do it so that the guitar plays in tune better. So now let's just go ahead and put the strings back on, and let's see where we're at. This is largely a guessing game at this point. The more experienced you are, the better you get at being able to make an adjustment like that, and just know what exactly is the amount of saddle you want to shave off of there. Since if you haven't had any experience at it, that's why I suggest moving slowly and just taking a little tiny bit at a time. And now you can see why we wound those up there. Just these 3 strings here are already tangled. At least we only have a couple to untangle here. So now we just need to go ahead and tune it back up. This is why I like a tuning fork. It makes it fairly quick. First I'll put a little tension on the strings here. I have a habit of tightening the middle strings first. This is because, once again, a lot of the acoustic guitars have pickups, and if you tighten one on the outside, you might overpressure the outside of it and throw the thing off a little bit. So if you take and do the middle strings first, you'll bring that saddle down nice and even. It'll stay even over the top of your pickup, and you'll have less trouble overall. Some people with acoustic guitars like to change the strings 1 or 2 at a time. Not a bad idea, but not really necessary if you remember to tighten the inner strings first. And I just work my way down to the outside strings. These string winders are well worth their weight in gold. So now here we go. Let's get it up to pitch. Okay, we've got her in tune now. We've put her back in that drop D. Let's stick the capo back on. And now let's check and see if our adjustment there on the saddle was good. Right there at the neck joint again, we'll check it. Oh, that's just what we want. We're right at the 3/32. And our 7/64. I don't actually read the 7/64 on a ruler. It's too small for me. I just look at the 32 and adjust by thinking, well, it's halfway between. So I'm going to take a look though now at all the other strings. Let's make sure they're all in sync. And make sure we've got our radius matching here. And it should just very easily move its way up to from the 3/32 to the 7/64. I know that's not much, but you want it to move smoothly. That way the guitar really plays in balance. And we're right where we want to be. So now we're going to move to the final stage here where we adjust the nut. For this guitar, we're going to need to get the 13 and the 16, the 25, the 38, and we should have a 48 and a 58. These are the files you're going to need to adjust the nut on this guitar. Okay, so now we need to take a look at the string height here off the nut. And this is a part of the job where I want you to use feel and touch. And you can just tell when you touch that string to that first fret how high that is. And then just hold it down on the first fret and touch it to the second fret. And you want those two to be fairly close to the same. The idea is to have the nut, for a typical acoustic guitar setup anyhow, that it's just a little bit higher than when we touch the first fret and go to the second fret. That's going to be just a little bit lower. So when you go across like this, you can feel, well, there's just that little bit of space there. And there's a little bit more here. Well, on this B string, that's even a little bit more than a little bit more. So we're going to have to adjust that one. We need to bring that down. This is crucial when you want to get a guitar to really feel balanced. So let's go ahead and get our nut files out here. For the B string, we're going to need to use the 16. So we just pull the B string out of the way, get our 16 file, and we're going to file that. And because it's a 16 and the string there is actually a 17, I'm going to move the file back and forth a little bit while I file. That makes the slot just a little bit wider. I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. I'm going to show you a little trick when we get to the end, how to make sure that the string is sitting nice and tight. But this is something like the bridge saddle. Let's move slow, just a little bit at a time. Take it back, put it in. You might go back and forth 10, 15 times to get this right. I'm touching that again. Got a little bit of room there. Now I go hold it down on the first fret, touch the second fret. We're still a little bit too much. A little too much height there off the nut. Let's bring that down just a little bit more. Pull out our 16 file here. Move it around a little bit. Make sure when you're putting this string in there, go to lift it up. If it's binding, it means the slot's a little too tight. Beware if you do that, because you might find that when you come and touch it up a little bit more, all of a sudden it just drops down. So make sure that that string is coming in and out nice and easy, and that it's dropping down all the way. Let's take a look at it again. Okay, I think we've got it where we want it. That feels pretty good. So now that we have it where we want it, what I like to do is go to the next size lower. And I do this on all of the strings, because you can get some sit-tarring in at the nut up here when the string is open and you hit it. It'll have a little bit of an extra resonation to it, because the string is vibrating inside there a little bit. So you do want it to be fairly tight, but only a little bit. If it's too tight around the whole string, the string will actually get stuck, and you don't want that. So now we take the next size down, which in this case is a 13. And I'm just going to run that real softly and straight up and down into the nut, just getting the very bottom of that groove set. Now this 16, well actually this is a 17, it's going to sit in there nice and tight. Get a nice clean sound out of it. Okay, we're all set. Now if you measure your action, we have the capo off. The nut has been adjusted, truss rod's adjusted. You'll come down here and your action is going to be a little bit higher than what we had anticipated. But I took that into consideration when I was setting up those measurements we were going to use. We wanted a little over 3/30 seconds for a typical setup on an acoustic, and just under 1/8 of an inch on the low E. And that's right where we're at now, just where we want to be. So that will do it. Put your truss rod cover back on and you're all set. You've been tuned. You can double check your tuning, make sure you're tuned up to pitch, and play it up and down. And one of the things you like to do is play every note on the guitar. And you may have to make an adjustment for that if you have a bad fret here or there. You may have to, that may be time to bring it into the specialist at your favorite shop.